Today, we're about to explore the most dumb deaths ever recorded, from a couple pushing an extreme temperature challenge for views to a pair ignoring escalating reaction symptoms in the most stupid and shocking way ever. It was May 27th, 2018. The Everglades stretched under a hazy Florida sun, humid air thick with the smell of algae and decay. Lucas Bren, a 28-year-old fitness influencer, and his wife Naomi, 25, waded knee-deep into the marsh with a waterproof phone mount and backpack. The Brens had built a modest following, promoting what they called primal protein nutrition, a diet emphasizing wild-caught foods and ancestral eating patterns. Lucas worked part-time as a personal trainer, while Naomi managed their online merchandise store, selling protein supplements and workout guides. Their Instagram featured photos of them spearfishing, foraging wild plants, and consuming unconventional foods like rattlesnake and turtle. That afternoon, the couple had driven to a remote access point with a specific goal: filming themselves harvesting alligator eggs for what Lucas described in earlier posts as the ultimate primal protein challenge. The Everglades ecosystem is a vast wetland where alligators nest during late spring, laying eggs in mounds of vegetation near water. Female American alligators remain close to their nests for the entire 63 to 68-day incubation period, often within a few feet, and will defend them aggressively against any perceived threat with short explosive bursts of speed. Wildlife conservation regulations strictly prohibit disturbing or taking alligator eggs without permits, and warnings throughout the park cautioned visitors to maintain distance from all wildlife, including posted notices about nesting season and guarded nests. The Brens had received criticism before for their increasingly dangerous content, but engagement metrics kept climbing with each risky stunt. Naomi activated the phone camera on her chest as they waded into the murky water, documenting their approach. Lucas spotted a nest mound approximately 40 yards from the access trail, situated beside a shallow marl slough with intermittent exposed limestone shelves beneath the water. The couple discussed briefly whether to proceed, aware that alligators could be nearby, but dismissing the danger as exaggerated. The marsh bottom was soft marl mixed with sharp limestone edges beneath 2 feet of brown water. Neither wore protective gear beyond sneakers and shorts. Lucas reached the nest mound and began pulling apart vegetation, while Naomi filmed from 5 feet away. The phone captured everything that followed. A 10-foot female alligator defending the nest exploded from submerged vegetation 15 feet to their right, closing the distance in under 3 seconds. Naomi screamed and turned to run, but the alligator's jaws clamped onto her left leg, dragging her under immediately, forcing her face below the waterline. Lucas lunged toward his wife, but the alligator surfaced and struck again, biting his right arm and thigh simultaneously. The attack lasted approximately 20 seconds of thrashing visible in the recovered footage before Lucas collapsed backward, his skull striking a submerged limestone shelf with audible impact. The phone remained mounted on Naomi's chest, still recording underwater as she drowned, the image rapidly degrading as silt and vegetation clouded the lens. 2 kayakers 200 yards away heard the screaming and called emergency services. Wildlife officers arrived 35 minutes later, after staging from a public launch and traveling by airboat, recovering both bodies by 5:40 in the afternoon after securing the aggressive female alligator, which was euthanized in accordance with standard procedure. The medical examiner determined Naomi died from drowning, combined with severe tissue damage from multiple bite wounds to her leg and torso. Lucas died from blood loss and blunt force head trauma, causing massive brain hemorrhaging, with examiners also documenting patterned bite injuries and the absence of post-mortem scavenging. The recovered phone footage was heavily degraded and never released publicly, with only still frames retained by authorities for the report. The couple's social media channels were quietly deactivated by the family within days, leaving no active accounts or content online. Their stunt and deaths remained largely unnoticed outside official records and local news. It was March 18, 2016, at a suburban shopping center in central Ohio, where weekend shoppers moved between floors beneath glass ceilings. Zelda Quigg, 41, worked in an office environment and had a habit of ignoring posted safety rules when she believed they were unnecessary. She navigated the busy corridors, pushing a metal grocery cart with her 6-year-old child seated comfortably inside, having filled it with their weekly shopping haul, weighing approximately 40 pounds. Approaching the downward escalator leading to the parking level, Zelda encountered prominent yellow warning signs prohibiting shopping carts and strollers on the moving stairs. The signs clearly directed customers with wheeled items to use the elevator located just 30 feet away, where other shoppers were already using the alternative route. A middle-aged woman nearby noticed Zelda positioning her loaded cart at the escalator entrance and warned her, pointing to the posted signs and gesturing toward the nearby elevator. Zelda waved off the concern and continued forward, appearing annoyed by the interruption and confident that the rules did not apply to her. As Zelda attempted to guide the cart onto the moving steps, the front wheels initially rolled onto the first step successfully. Within seconds, however, the rear wheels caught firmly against the metal comb plate at the escalator entrance. This mechanical resistance caused the heavy cart to twist violently sideways across the full width of the moving staircase. The sudden rotation threw her child forward from their seated position, sending them tumbling onto the escalator steps below. Zelda instinctively lunged forward to help, but the twisted cart now created an unstable barrier. She fell chest first across the metal frame, her upper body striking the cart's edge with considerable force. The escalator's downward motion kept pressing the twisted cart forward, driving Zelda's upper body against the side panel as the steps continued to move beneath her. Her head and chest were pinned briefly between the cart's metal frame and the escalator side panel, while her body was dragged several steps before the motion could be stopped. Witnesses later reported that her head struck the metal edge of the escalator housing during the struggle. Nearby shoppers stood frozen momentarily, in shock before anyone reacted. After approximately 7 seconds, multiple witnesses rushed to activate the emergency stop button, bringing the escalator to an abrupt halt. By the time the escalator stopped, Zelda was slumped across the cart and not responding to those calling her name, showing only shallow, irregular breathing. Emergency medical responders arrived within minutes, working carefully to extract both victims from the escalator mechanism. Paramedics immediately assessed Zelda's condition, but could detect no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at the scene despite their efforts. Security personnel cordoned off the area while investigators documented the scene. The subsequent medical examination determined that Zelda had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head and upper chest, along with crushing injuries caused by being pinned against the escalator structure. The medical examiner concluded that the combination of head impact and chest compression led to rapid loss of consciousness and cardiac arrest. Her child survived the fall with only minor injuries, requiring basic medical treatment at a nearby hospital. Mall security provided surveillance footage that clearly documented the entire sequence of events from multiple angles. Local authorities confirmed that the escalator had been operating normally and that all emergency stop systems functioned as designed when activated by witnesses. The final investigation concluded that the fatality resulted directly from equipment misuse, despite clearly posted safety guidelines and the immediate availability of safe alternatives. It was July 14th, 2016, in the backyard of a suburban home outside Kansas City, Missouri. Folding tables had been arranged across the lawn for a summer block party, and a crowd of neighbors gathered around a large rectangular block of ice resting on a wooden stand. Music played from portable speakers. Drinks were passed between guests, and several phones were already raised, recording what was about to happen. John Paulson, 38, worked as a warehouse supervisor and was known among friends for enjoying tools, home projects, and attention-grabbing stunts. He had no formal training in sculpture, but earlier that afternoon, he announced he would carve an ice sculpture for the party. Instead of using traditional carving tools, he brought out a gasoline-powered chainsaw, explaining that it would be faster and more impressive. The chainsaw had been designed for cutting wood, not ice. John wore no gloves, no face shield, and no protective apron. He stood in shorts and sneakers, positioning himself close to the block while several guests stepped back to give him room. A few people later said they felt uneasy, but assumed he knew what he was doing. John pulled the starter cord, and the chainsaw roared to life. He placed the spinning chain against the front edge of the ice, sending a spray of chips and meltwater across the grass. The crowd laughed and cheered as he traced shallow cuts into the surface, trying to shape the block freehand. As the blade moved deeper, water pooled beneath the stand, turning the grass slick. The surface of the ice became uneven, forcing John to adjust his grip and angle. Witnesses later said the saw appeared to hesitate briefly as the chain bound against a harder ridge inside the block. Without warning, the chain caught. The saw kicked back violently, snapping upward and sideways toward his body. John instinctively tried to pull away, but the sudden force threw his balance off. His right foot slipped on the wet grass, and the chainsaw swung downward across his upper thigh. The spinning chain tore through muscle and soft tissue before the engine stalled. John collapsed immediately, dropping the saw as blood spread rapidly across the lawn. Several guests rushed forward, pressing towels and clothing against the wound, while others called 911. The bleeding was severe and continuous. Attempts to slow it were ineffective, and within minutes, John became pale and unresponsive. Paramedics arrived to find massive blood loss from a deep laceration to the upper leg. Despite emergency treatment and rapid transport, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to a chainsaw laceration to the femoral region. Toxicology tests were negative for alcohol and drugs. Investigators found no mechanical defect in the chainsaw, concluding that the accident resulted from improper tool use, lack of protective equipment, and loss of footing on a wet surface. Safety officials later issued warnings reminding the public that chainsaws are not designed for carving or entertainment demonstrations, and that kickback injuries remain one of the most common causes of fatal chainsaw accidents. The unfinished block of ice melted overnight, leaving only wet grass and splintered wood where the sculpture was meant to stand.
It was March 21st, 2017, when afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds of a second-floor bedroom in a split-level home outside Dayton, Ohio. The room belonged to a college sophomore, its walls decorated with posters and sports equipment scattered across the floor. The house was empty. Dalton Reeve was 20 years old and in his second year at a nearby community college, where he was studying business administration and playing on an intramural basketball team. He had been active on social media for several years and spent increasing amounts of time consuming video content on platforms popular with his age group. His parents, who he still lived with, later reported that his screen time had grown substantially, though they had not observed behavior they considered alarming. During this period, a particularly dangerous challenge had gained visibility among younger users. Participants attempted to restrict blood flow and airflow through the neck by applying pressure around it, filming themselves until they lost consciousness. The videos were framed as demonstrations of control or fearlessness. The challenge had already resulted in multiple deaths in other countries, though this information was not widely known among users at the time. Dalton had watched numerous videos featuring the challenge over the previous 2 weeks and discussed it with friends, some of whom claimed to have tried it themselves. On the afternoon in question, he was home alone, with several hours before anyone was expected to return. He set up his phone on his desk, with the camera facing his bed. The mechanics were deceptively simple but critically dangerous. Participants typically used a belt or cord to create a ligature around the neck, tightening it to compress the structures of the neck, including blood vessels supplying the brain. The intended effect was rapid loss of consciousness, which participants believed would last only seconds before they naturally released the ligature. This assumption was fundamentally flawed. Once consciousness was lost, muscle control disappeared entirely, allowing the ligature to remain tightened and continue depriving the brain of oxygen. Dalton positioned himself, sitting on the edge of his bed with his back to the camera. He wrapped a leather belt around his neck, threading the end through the buckle to form a loop. He started the recording, confirmed that he was visible in the frame, and began pulling the belt tighter with both hands. Witnesses who later reviewed the footage described a rapid progression. Within approximately 15 to 20 seconds, Dalton's movements became uncoordinated. As he slumped sideways onto the bed, his body weight kept the belt tightened against his neck. He remained visible in the frame, motionless except for occasional involuntary movements that gradually ceased. The recording continued for more than 8 minutes before his mother arrived home. She called his name from downstairs and received no response, then went upstairs and entered his room. She found him unresponsive with the belt around his neck and immediately called emergency services while attempting to remove the ligature. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes and began resuscitation efforts, but Dalton had been without adequate oxygen for too long. He was transported to a nearby hospital and placed on life support. Neurological assessments over the next 2 days showed no brain activity, and his family later withdrew support. He was pronounced dead on the 3rd day. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be anoxic brain injury due to ligature strangulation, classified as accidental. The phone was secured as evidence, and local authorities later issued warnings through area colleges and the surrounding community. It was March 3rd, 2018, in the rear service alley behind a retail strip in Fort Worth, Texas. The night air was cool and still, with temperatures around 58 degrees and clear skies providing adequate visibility under scattered streetlights. 24-year-old Daxby Kroom had built a modest online following by filming urban treasure hunting content, exploring dumpsters behind retail establishments in search of discarded electronics and other valuable items. His videos typically featured late-night excursions to avoid confrontation with business owners. Daxby was known for climbing completely inside large containers to thoroughly search through materials, often ignoring safety warnings in his pursuit of dramatic content. That evening, Daxby had targeted a commercial strip that included electronics retailers and clothing stores, anticipating their waste containers might yield interesting finds for his live stream audience. He positioned himself near a large horizontal compactor unit, a commercial waste management system designed to compress refuse using hydraulic pressure. The unit featured prominent warning labels, but Daxby had developed a pattern of dismissing such precautions. The compactor measured approximately 8 feet in length and 4 feet in height, with a hinged lid providing access to the interior chamber. The system was equipped with a timer-based automatic cycle programmed to activate during early morning hours when the business was closed. These cycles operated on predetermined schedules, initiating the hydraulic ram at specific intervals, regardless of container contents. Daxby lifted the heavy metal lid and climbed inside the container, placing his phone at the opening with the camera facing downward to capture his search activities. The interior chamber contained various discarded materials, including cardboard, plastic packaging, and electronic components. He began systematically sorting through the contents, completely unaware that the scheduled compression cycle was approaching its programmed activation time. The compactor initiated its automated compression cycle, activating the horizontal hydraulic ram that began advancing from one end of the chamber toward the other. The mechanical system operated with significant force, designed to compress large volumes of commercial waste. As the ram advanced, the available space within the chamber decreased rapidly. Daxby attempted to brace himself against the walls as he realized the danger, but the hydraulic system continued its predetermined cycle with unstoppable mechanical force. The ram pressed forward, compressing compressing both the waste materials and anything else within the chamber. The compression process caused severe blunt force trauma and crushing injuries as the hydraulic mechanism completed its program sequence. The live stream audio captured the sound of the hydraulic motor before the feed abruptly terminated. The following morning, a sanitation worker arrived for routine collection and noticed a fault indicator light on the compactor control panel. When maintenance personnel opened the chamber, they discovered Daxby's body and immediately contacted emergency services. Paramedics pronounced him deceased at the scene. The county medical examiner ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma and crush injuries due to compactor compression. The automated system had functioned exactly as designed, executing its scheduled cycle without mechanical malfunction. Police investigators ruled the death accidental, occurring during unauthorized entry into commercial waste management equipment. Their report documented multiple warning signs clearly visible on the unit's exterior. The compactor was temporarily taken offline during investigation but returned to service after inspection.
It was January 19th, 2017. The morning air at Lake Tahoe's northeastern shore registered 22 degrees Fahrenheit as Caleb and Maya Sturphausen prepared their backyard contrast therapy setup. Caleb and Maya were a married couple in their early 30s who'd built a modest social media following, documenting their CrossFit journey and biohacking experiments. Caleb worked as an insurance adjuster, while Maya managed a local organic grocery store. Their YouTube channel had roughly 3,000 subscribers who followed their workout routines, supplement reviews, and recovery protocols. They'd recently become obsessed with contrast therapy after watching influencers tout its benefits. Contrast therapy involves exposing the body to alternating temperature extremes, typically cold water followed by heat. The drastic temperature shifts cause rapid blood vessel constriction and dilation. Medical professionals recommend gradual transitions and moderate temperature differences. Caleb and Maya had spent weeks doing ice baths, followed by hot showers, but explained in an update video that they wanted something more extreme for their channel. They'd purchased a wood-fired soaking tub and positioned it on their lakefront property, planning to cut a hole in the frozen lake ice for maximum contrast. That morning, they'd ignored basic safety guidelines entirely. The wood-fired tub had been heating since dawn, reaching temperatures around 118 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond the recommended maximum of 104 degrees. They'd used a chainsaw to cut a 4x4-foot hole in the lake ice, exposing water that measured 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Caleb had positioned 3 cameras, one mounted on a tripod facing the lake, one on the tub deck, and Maya's phone propped against a tree. In a recorded footage, they said that they planned to immerse in the freezing lake for 3 minutes, then sprint directly into the dangerously overheated tub. At approximately 8:15 in the morning, both entered the lake hole simultaneously. The shock was immediate and visible on camera. Their breathing became rapid and panicked as the frigid water triggered an involuntary gasp reflex and uncontrolled hyperventilation. After exactly 3 minutes, they scrambled out with visibly impaired coordination and ran the 15 feet to the wooden tub, climbing in together. Within seconds, both clutched their chests. The extreme temperature swing from 34 degrees to nearly 120 degrees placed sudden stress on their cardiovascular systems. Caleb grabbed at his upper back while Maya pressed both hands to her sternum. The tripod camera captured both of them convulsing briefly before slumping face down into the steaming water simultaneously. The image partially blurred as condensation formed on the lens. Neither surfaced or moved again. A neighbor walking his dog noticed steam rising unusually high from the Sturphausen property and heard the cameras still running, but no voices. He approached the fence line around 8:35 in the morning and saw two bodies floating motionless in the tub. He called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes, but both victims showed no vital signs. The autopsy revealed both had suffered sudden fatal cardiac arrhythmias, most consistent with ventricular fibrillation. Neither Caleb nor Maya had any documented history of cardiac disease, structural heart abnormalities, or prior arrhythmic episodes. Toxicology reports were negative for alcohol, caffeine, stimulants, or other substances that could have contributed to the event. Pulmonary edema and water in the airways indicated rapid loss of consciousness and aspiration, and the manner of death was ruled accidental. Both were likely unconscious within 30 seconds and dead within 3 minutes. After family consent and redaction, the footage was later provided to regional fire departments and emergency medical services for training purposes. The Sturphausen family quietly sold the lakefront property 6 months later, and their social media accounts were deleted. It was November 22, 2014, at a subway station in Brooklyn, New York. Fluorescent lights reflected off the platform tiles, while the third rail hummed with roughly 600 volts just 4 feet below the edge. The evening rush had thinned to scattered commuters, most absorbed in their phones. Johan Ocampo, a 21-year-old Brooklyn college student, had been working part-time at an electronics repair shop. Friends described him as meticulous and methodical, especially when handling smartphones, which contained his personal, academic, and social information. This evening, he had been video chatting with his girlfriend while returning from a late shift and had positioned himself near the platform edge. He understood that the third rail carried a lethal charge, but did not anticipate that retrieving a dropped device would put him in direct contact with it. At approximately 11:34 p.m., Johan's phone slipped from his hands and fell onto the tracks below the platform. He stepped onto the track bed in an attempt to retrieve the device. Several commuters later said they assumed he would climb back up immediately. The track surface was uneven, with wooden ties, gravel, and debris accumulated from daily operations, creating a challenging and unstable footing. The platform edge, marked with a yellow warning line, was only a few feet from the energized third rail, which ran parallel to the tracks. Other commuters were present on the platform, but none entered the track area or attempted to assist. Johan moved cautiously toward the phone, which had landed functional and screen lit, while balancing himself on the ballast between the rails. As he reached the phone, he crouched to pick it up, adjusting his footing on the uneven surface. At that moment, his left hand made contact with the third rail, which carried high voltage direct current. The electrical current passed through his body immediately, causing involuntary muscle contractions that prevented him from lifting his hand or moving away from the rail. The contact disrupted normal motor function, leaving him effectively incapacitated within seconds. Nearby transit personnel observed the event through surveillance and responded quickly, cutting power to the section of track to prevent further hazard. Investigators later determined that the electrical current was sufficient to cause immediate neuromuscular paralysis and severe disruption of normal muscle and heart function, leaving little opportunity for self-rescue. During the sequence, Johan's body remained in contact with the energized rail for the duration of the exposure. Surveillance footage and witness statements showed that he remained in contact with the energized rail for several seconds, while the surrounding environment, gravel, ballast, and proximity to the platform edge limited his ability to move away. The sequence of events from stepping onto the tracks to incapacitation occurred in a matter of seconds, emphasizing how quickly third rail contact can become fatal. Emergency responders were dispatched immediately after power was cut, but the brief window for intervention had already passed, making effective intervention unlikely before help could arrive. Emergency responders arrived at 11:41 p.m. and found Johan unresponsive on the tracks. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead shortly after midnight. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as electrocution with secondary cardiac arrest, noting burns consistent with third rail contact. Investigators concluded that stepping onto the tracks and contacting the energized rail left almost no opportunity for self-rescue, and the rapid sequence allowed little time for effective intervention. Afterward, the city's transit authority increased safety announcements and installed additional warning signs about third rail hazards. Johan's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which was dismissed after courts ruled the incident constituted criminal trespass. A memorial scholarship was later established in his name.
It was January 29th, 2019. Arctic air gripped suburban Minneapolis as temperatures plunged below zero. Fresh snow covering quiet residential yards, while pale morning light settled over a fenced backyard. Marlo Keegan was 28 years old and worked as a marketing coordinator for a regional insurance company, managing social media accounts and digital campaigns. Outside of work, she maintained an active personal presence across multiple platforms, posting lifestyle content to several thousand followers. Friends later described her as highly focused on engagement metrics and follower growth, often planning posts around trending topics to maximize visibility. That morning, a viral cold weather trend was spreading across social media. People filmed themselves throwing boiling water into freezing air to create a burst of ice crystals, and the ongoing polar vortex pushed hundreds of similar clips online within days. The effect looked simple, fast, and visually dramatic, drawing attention from creators chasing engagement. Marlo decided to try it herself. She set her phone on a backyard tripod and framed the shot to capture both her movement and the vapor cloud. After watching a few examples, she prepared the setup without fully understanding the risks, unaware that shifting wind and fragmented droplets could redirect heat back toward the person filming. Marlo brought a pot containing several liters of water to a rolling boil and carried it outside, steam rising into the freezing air. She stood about 5 feet from the camera, angling her body toward the lens to keep her face visible. The wind seemed calm during setup, but the cold air remained unpredictable. She began recording and swung the pot in a wide motion, throwing the boiling water upward and to her right. At the moment of release, a sudden gust of wind came from behind her, altering the trajectory of the water mid-throw. Instead of dispersing away from her body, a portion of the boiling liquid fragmented into droplets, and along with a dense cloud of high-temperature steam, was driven directly back toward her face and upper chest. Marlo reacted instinctively, gasping as the redirected spray made contact with her mouth and nose. Several droplets struck her lower face and lips, while steam enveloped her head at close range. The reflexive inhalation drew a mixture of hot vapor and aerosolized water into her upper airway. She stumbled backward, dropping the pot into the snow, and collapsed to her knees as the recording continued. Thermal injury to the airway can occur rapidly when hot vapor or liquid is inhaled. Burns to the mouth, throat, and larynx can trigger swelling that progresses over several minutes as tissue reacts to heat exposure. Marlo's breathing became harsh and strained, producing high-pitched sounds as airflow narrowed. She remained conscious but was unable to speak or call out. Her husband, who had been inside the house, heard the pot strike the ground and reached the backyard within roughly 30 seconds. He found Marlo seated in the snow, burned around the mouth and chin, clutching her throat and struggling to breathe. She was unable to speak, and her breathing was increasingly labored. He called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes and found Marlo in severe respiratory distress, with visible swelling around the mouth and airway. Oxygen levels continued to decline despite supplemental oxygen, and attempts to secure an airway became increasingly difficult as swelling limited visualization and access. She lost consciousness during the transport and suffered cardiac arrest shortly before arrival, where she was pronounced dead. They later determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to thermal injury and upper airway edema The recovered video was later referenced in public safety warnings, and platforms added caution labels to similar content.
It was May 9th, 2015, inside a small neighborhood hair salon in Phoenix, Arizona, where weekend clients filled the chairs and hood dryers hummed beneath warm afternoon light. Lana Wexler was 38 and worked part-time in an administrative office, known among co-workers for her impatience with delays and disregard for routine instructions when she felt rushed or inconvenienced. That afternoon, she had called ahead, requesting a last-minute appointment before an evening social gathering, anxious to finish quickly and leave on time. After her styling session, the stylist guided her beneath an older industrial hood dryer and instructed her to remain seated while the cooling cycle completed. Lana checked her phone repeatedly, growing restless as minutes passed and the machine continued running behind her. The salon remained busy around her. Another client sat quietly beneath a similar dryer, following standard protocol without issue. Staff moved between stations, trimming, rinsing, and styling as usual. The equipment around the room operated normally, filling the space with steady mechanical noise and circulating warm air. The hood dryer above Lana's chair was an older model, awaiting replacement parts. Investigators would later note that the rear ventilation guard had been removed weeks earlier after damage was discovered, leaving the intake opening partially exposed. Warning labels remained visible on the housing, cautioning users to remain stationary while the unit operated. Against the stylist's instructions, Lana rose abruptly from the chair while the dryer continued running at full speed. Her long hair, only loosely secured, fell free around her shoulders as she stood. As she straightened, several strands brushed against the exposed intake opening and were immediately pulled inward by the rotating fan assembly. The motor continued operating normally, drawing more hair into the internal mechanism. Lana instinctively turned toward the sudden pulling sensation, but the movement only fed additional strands into the compromised intake. Within seconds, tension built rapidly as her hair wrapped tightly around the spinning blades. Feeling the escalating force on her scalp, she attempted to step backward. Instead, the trapped strands drew her head violently upward toward the intake opening as the rotating mechanism continued winding her hair inward. Her face and neck were pulled against the rigid housing of the dryer as the machine maintained constant speed. Her neck hyperextended sharply under the mechanical traction, forcing her head into an unnatural position while the motor continued pulling. Within moments, the sustained force dislocated her upper cervical spine and caused catastrophic injury to the brainstem and spinal cord. When staff finally cut power to the unit, her body collapsed to the floor beneath the dryer, completely unresponsive, while her hair remained tightly trapped inside the intake mechanism. Emergency services were called immediately. Responders arrived within minutes and found Lana unresponsive with obvious signs of severe head and neck trauma. No resuscitation attempts were successful. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death as a high cervical spine dislocation with fatal brainstem and spinal cord injury caused by mechanical traction from the entangled hair. The injury was consistent with sudden hyperextension under sustained pulling force. Investigators found the dryer had been operating normally, but the missing rear ventilation guard left the intake opening unprotected. The final report concluded that the death resulted from deferred maintenance and improper use, noting that either repairing the guard or remaining seated would have prevented the fatal entanglement entirely.
It was September 9th, 2018, in a municipal storm drainage system beneath Atlanta, Georgia. Heavy rainfall had been falling intermittently throughout the evening, with weather reports indicating continued precipitation upstream from the downtown area. The concrete drainage pipe measured approximately 5 feet in diameter and extended several hundred feet beneath the urban landscape, designed to channel runoff during storm events. 26-year-old Corbin Dwale had established established himself as an urban exploration content creator, specializing in documenting abandoned buildings, utility tunnels, and underground infrastructure throughout the southeastern United States. His videos typically featured solo expeditions into restricted locations, often filmed during nighttime hours to avoid detection. Corbin was known for his willingness to enter active utility systems and dismiss posted warning signs as overly cautious measures. That evening, Corbin had announced a special live stream exploration of what he described as Atlanta's hidden underground network. He had located an accessible entry point to the storm drain system in a residential area several miles upstream from the city center. The drainage pipe appeared dry at entry, with only shallow standing water covering the concrete floor. Corbin had equipped himself with a chest-mounted camera and handheld lighting, but had not brought rope, communication devices, or external safety support. Weather conditions upstream had been deteriorating throughout the day, with rainfall accumulating in watershed areas that fed into the drainage system. Local meteorologists had issued flood watches for low-lying areas, but Corbin had not consulted current weather reports before beginning his exploration. Corbin entered the pipe and began walking downstream, documenting the concrete, construction, and debris deposits along the tunnel walls. The water level at entry measured approximately ankle-deep, moving at a slow pace toward downtown discharge points. He had traveled roughly 150 feet into the system when upstream rainfall began to intensify significantly, creating rapid runoff from paved surfaces feeding into the drainage network. The increased runoff created a surge of water that began moving through the pipe system much faster than normal flow. Within minutes, the water level rose from ankle deep to waist high as volume and velocity increased dramatically. The concrete walls, made slick by years of algae growth, provided no reliable handholds for maintaining position against the accelerating current. Corbin lost his footing on the algae-covered concrete floor as the surge swept him downstream toward a bend in the pipe system. The current carried him approximately 200 feet before he became pinned against a metal debris grate designed to catch large objects before they reached the main discharge outlet. The force of the water flow held him against the barrier, preventing him from repositioning himself or moving to areas with lower water levels. Emergency responders were alerted when concerned viewers contacted local authorities after the video feed was interrupted. Rescue crews accessed the drainage system through a downstream maintenance opening and located Corbin at the debris grate. Despite immediate rescue efforts, the combination of water pressure and extended submersion had already created a fatal situation. Corbin was removed from the drainage system and pronounced deceased at the scene. The county medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning due to flash flooding inside the storm drainage system. City officials ruled the death accidental, occurring during unauthorized entry into active municipal infrastructure. Authorities closed the case, ruling that Corbin Dwale drowned after flash flooding trapped him in the storm drains during an unauthorized visit in hazardous weather.
It was April 2nd, 2014. The afternoon heat in Miami, Florida hung thick over a modest apartment complex in Kendall, where Jonah Pell and Sloan Merritt prepared to film what they believed would be their most groundbreaking content yet. Jonah and Sloan weren't scientists or nutritionists. They were self-taught paleo lifestyle advocates who had built a modest following of 2,000 subscribers on their joint channel promoting ancestral eating practices. Together, they pushed increasingly extreme interpretations of paleo eating, convinced that mimicking prehistoric diets would unlock superior health. Their content evolved from cooking grass-fed beef to consuming raw organ meats, always seeking the next shocking nutritional experiment. The couple had spent 3 months sourcing what they called the ultimate ancestral superfood, preserved polar bear liver. They'd connected through online forums with an illegal exotic meat supplier, paying $800 for a vacuum-sealed portion shipped from an undisclosed location. Polar bear liver has dangerously high vitamin A, with just an ounce enough to cause hypervitaminosis a fact known since early 20th century Arctic explorers died from eating it, despite warnings from multiple online sources and nutrition databases. Jonah and Sloan dismissed them as fear-mongering meant to suppress ancestral wisdom. That afternoon, they filmed themselves eating about 4 ounces of the dark, oily liver each, noting a metallic, fishy taste. Both experienced immediate nausea and worsening headaches, but blamed it on flavor, not toxicity. They ended the video urging viewers to try apex predator organs, citing ancestral diets. By 9:30 that evening, both were experiencing severe headaches and persistent vomiting. Sloane's vision likely began blurring, and her skin would have felt tender to touch. The symptoms worsened steadily through the night, but friends they were chatting with through the ordeal said that they convinced themselves this was detoxification, a concept popular in alternative health communities, and went to bed expecting to feel better by morning. The next day brought escalating horror. Both developed intense photosensitivity that forced them to keep the apartment dark. The headaches intensified to the point neither could stand without vomiting. By afternoon, Jonah's coordination deteriorated noticeably, and Sloan became increasingly confused, asking repetitive questions and forgetting conversations within minutes. On April 4th, at 6:15 in the morning, Jonah collapsed in the bathroom. Sloan, now severely jaundiced with yellowed eyes and skin, managed to call emergency services and explained everything. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, finding both victims in critical condition with visible neurological impairment and uncontrolled vomiting. They provided oxygen support, established intravenous access, and transported both patients emergently, notifying the receiving hospital of a suspected toxic ingestion. They were transported to a regional medical center where both died within hours. Jonah at 11:40 in the morning and Sloan at 2:15 in the afternoon, despite aggressive supportive care in intensive care units. Autopsy reports confirmed acute hypervitaminosis A. Findings included severe acute liver failure with marked hepatic tissue damage and profound cerebral edema, with fluid accumulating inside their skulls, creating fatal intracranial pressure that caused irreversible brain injury. Sloane's brother accessed their apartment and deleted the channel within 36 hours of their deaths. State public health inspectors and wildlife enforcement officers seized remaining supplements and exotic meat products for testing, and federal wildlife authorities opened an investigation into the illegal supplier.
It was February 21st, 2018, when late evening darkness had settled over a residential neighborhood in suburban Phoenix. Most homes showed interior lights, and the street was quiet with little traffic. The temperature had cooled into the mid-50s after a warm day, and the neighborhood remained still as residents settled in for the night. Brennan Cade was 21 years old and attending a local community college part-time while working at a retail electronics store. He rented a room in a house shared with 2 other young men in their early 20s. Housemates later reported he spent much of his free time alone in his room watching online videos. Friends described him as easily bored and frequently seeking attention from his social circle through humor or risky stunts. During late 2017 and early 2018, a dangerous challenge had gained notoriety online. Participants filmed themselves biting into laundry detergent pods, single-use packets containing highly concentrated liquid detergent. The challenge was framed as shocking humor, with the unpleasant taste and obvious danger treated as part of the appeal. Most participants bit the pod briefly and spat out the contents without swallowing. The pods contained concentrated surfactants and enzymes sealed under pressure within a thin, water-soluble membrane. When ruptured inside the mouth, the contents could cause severe irritation to oral and airway tissues. If inhaled, the detergent could penetrate deep into the lungs, disrupting normal gas exchange and triggering chemical pneumonitis. Manufacturers had issued repeated warnings, and poison control centers had documented thousands of accidental exposures in young children. Intentional exposure by young adults attempting the challenge represented a newer and growing category of cases, with several hospitalizations already reported. That evening, Brennan's housemates had gone out for the night. Shortly after 11 o'clock, he decided to attempt the challenge himself. Believing he could control the exposure, he retrieved a pod from the laundry room and set up his phone on the kitchen counter, positioning it to capture his face and upper body. He did not wear gloves or take any protective measures, assuming the exposure would be brief and manageable. He began recording and bit into the pod. The membrane ruptured completely, releasing the pressurized contents into his mouth and throat. The reaction was immediate. Brennan bent over the sink, coughing violently as some of the detergent was aspirated into his airway. Between coughing episodes, his breathing became erratic and shallow as airway inflammation progressed. Rapid inflammation followed, and a swelling in his throat made breathing increasingly difficult. Attempts to rinse his mouth were ineffective as coughing intensified, leaving him unable to speak or call for help. One of his housemates returned early and found Brennan gasping at the sink. He called emergency services immediately while trying to assess Brennan's condition. Paramedics arrived within 11 minutes and found Brennan in severe respiratory distress with critically low oxygen levels. Assisted ventilation was initiated, and he was transported to a regional trauma center. Despite aggressive emergency care, severe lung injury prevented adequate oxygen exchange. Brennan suffered cardiac arrest from progressive hypoxia and could not be resuscitated. He was pronounced dead approximately 2 hours after the exposure. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by respiratory failure following detergent aspiration. Investigators later reviewed the phone recording to confirm the sequence of events, and local officials issued renewed warnings about the risks associated with online challenge content.
It was June 18, 2013, in a suburban backyard in Atlanta. A 14-foot trampoline stretched taut over steel springs with the purchased safety net and padding still unopened in the garage. The yard was quiet, except for a few classmates celebrating the end of the school year. Jonas Inares, 17, was a high school soccer player known for pushing physical limits. He frequently attempted acrobatic moves on the family trampoline without formal training, relying on self-taught techniques and YouTube tutorials. That afternoon, he was joined by 4 classmates who had been taking turns performing jumps and simple tricks. The celebratory atmosphere and encouragement from friends prompted Jonas to attempt a backflip he had never successfully completed. That afternoon, Jonas positioned himself in the center of the trampoline to attempt his most ambitious backflip yet. He built momentum with several controlled jumps, each bounce carrying him higher as the springs stretched and snapped back beneath his weight. His friends gathered along the perimeter, some cheering, one classmate lifting a phone to record. Several later said they assumed he would land safely because he had been jumping cleanly just moments earlier. As he launched upward, Jonas tucked his arms tightly and angled his chin down, initiating the rotation he intended to complete before landing upright. For an instant, the movement appeared smooth, but midway through the flip, his body rotated faster than expected. Instead of completing a single rotation, he over-rotated, passing nearly 1.5 turns. As he descended, he tried to throw his arms outward and straighten his neck to recover, but the speed of rotation and the sudden drop left no time to correct. He struck the trampoline head first. His neck flexed sharply forward as his torso continued rotating backward. The elastic surface rebounded unevenly beneath him, forcing his head and shoulders downward again and concentrating the impact along his cervical spine rather than absorbing it. The impact caused a catastrophic injury to Jonas's upper cervical spine, leaving him paralyzed and unable to breathe on his own. Witnesses saw his movement stop immediately, and attempts to assist his breathing were ineffective. Paramedics arrived at 3:53 p.m. and transported him to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 4:31 p.m. Medical examination confirmed respiratory failure from a high cervical spinal cord injury with no drugs or alcohol involved. A classmate's phone video captured the over-rotation and point of impact and was later submitted as evidence before being deleted. Investigators cited the lack of safety equipment and the untrained backflip as contributing factors, warning that unsupervised trampoline tricks remain a leading cause of fatal spinal injuries. It was February 2nd, 2018, when an overcast afternoon settled over a loading dock behind a mid-sized shopping plaza in central Ohio, where slick asphalt and steady drizzle slowed delivery operations. Sophia Dre, a 47-year-old resident coordinator at the neighboring apartment complex, had spent the last 8 years managing various tenant relations and facility access issues across properties in the region. Known among building staff for her domineering attitude and tendency to bypass established procedures when she deemed them inconvenient, Sophia approached situations with the confidence of someone who believed her status as a long-term resident trumped posted regulations. She had received multiple written notices from property management regarding unauthorized access to restricted areas, but had never faced serious consequences. That afternoon, she was attempting to retrieve a designer handbag she had accidentally discarded into the commercial waste compactor before the scheduled evening pickup. The standard retrieval protocol involved contacting maintenance staff who held keys to the compactor's access panel and lockout controls. However, the large industrial compactor sat with its top loading door propped open, the machine's motor humming in standby mode. The unit had been left accessible during an interrupted maintenance check, with the operator having stepped away temporarily. The control key remained in the panel, as was common practice during active service intervals. Rather than waiting for maintenance to return, Sophia made a calculated decision to retrieve the item herself. She approached the compactor and, ignoring the prominent warning decals about unauthorized access, positioned a nearby plastic milk crate against the unit's side. Using this as a step, she hoisted herself up and over the 4-foot metal rim, lowering herself into the compactor's chamber. The interior space measured approximately 6 feet deep, with vertical steel walls and a flat compression plate currently retracted at the top position. A maintenance worker returning with supplies called out a warning, but Sophia dismissed the concern with an irritated response. As Sophia bent down, searching through the compressed refuse pile, her weight shifted against the interior wall. This triggered the pressure-sensitive safety mechanism, but the system had been temporarily bypassed during the maintenance procedure. The compactor's automated cycle, still armed from its previous operational setting, interpreted the pressure change as a signal to resume the compression sequence. The massive steel plate, weighing over 800 pounds, began its motorized descent from the top of the chamber. The electric motor's steady hum blended with the ambient noise of delivery trucks and ventilation systems throughout the service corridor. Sophia realized the danger as the plate descended, but the smooth vertical walls offered no handholds for escape. The opening remained 4 feet above, now impossible to reach. The compression plate continued its programmed cycle, designed to compact waste into dense blocks. The sustained pressure compressed her body against the accumulated refuse and the chamber floor. The mechanical force continued through its full programmed compression cycle as the automated system completed its sequence. A delivery driver discovered the situation when noticing Sophia's shoes visible at the base of the compactor chamber. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes, but Sophia was found unresponsive. The compactor was immediately shut down and the plate reversed, but revival attempts were unsuccessful. The county coroner's examination determined the cause of death as crush asphyxia, resulting from sustained compression of the thoracic cavity. The official incident report documented Sophia's unauthorized entry into the restricted equipment, noting that standard safety protocols required contacting maintenance staff rather than personal retrieval attempts. The compactor showed no mechanical malfunction, operating exactly as designed. Property safety investigators concluded that proper adherence to posted procedures would have prevented the incident entirely. It was August 3rd, 2013. The humid Georgia air hung heavy over a small property outside Savannah, where Elliot Crane, 41, and his wife Mara, 38, maintained 6 beehives behind their converted garage studio. The Cranes ran a moderately successful blog focused on natural anti-inflammatory treatments, attracting roughly 4,000 followers interested in alternative wellness. Elliot had worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative before leaving the industry. Mara, a former yoga instructor with persistent joint issues, became convinced that bee venom therapy could reduce inflammation naturally. A small health supplement company provided them with free products in exchange for promotional posts. Bee venom therapy involves controlled stings from live honeybees, based on the theory that venom compounds trigger anti-inflammatory responses in the body. Practitioners typically start with 1 or 2 stings and monitor for allergic reactions, as repeated exposure can sensitize the immune system and trigger severe anaphylaxis even in people who previously tolerated stings without issue, a risk well documented in allergy literature. The Cranes had been performing daily sting sessions for 8 months, gradually increasing from 2 stings to over a dozen each per session. Neighbors later reported seeing both with visible facial swelling on multiple occasions. Mara had experienced throat tightness twice in the previous month, and Elliot developed hives after a session 3 weeks earlier. Despite these warning signs indicating progressive sensitization, a process where the immune response becomes increasingly severe with repeated exposure, they attributed the symptoms to detoxification and continued escalating their exposure. That afternoon, they planned to film their most intensive session yet for an upcoming blog post promoting bee venom as a pharmaceutical alternative. Their garage had a basic security camera installed to monitor the hives, positioned to capture the hive area, but not the interior of the house. Both had declined to keep epinephrine auto-injectors on site, despite a local beekeeper's recommendation, dismissing such precautions as unnecessary fear-mongering. The temperature was 91 degrees, with 78% humidity, conditions that make bees more defensive, especially when hives are disturbed. At 4:20 in the afternoon, Elliot attempted to remove a frame from their largest hive, while Mara stood nearby, preparing to receive stings. The frame slipped from his hands and fell, striking the hive box and toppling it completely. Hundreds of bees erupted in defensive swarm behavior, a coordinated response triggered by alarm pheromones, attacking both immediately. The security footage captured the next 8 minutes, though portions were partially obscured by the density of the swarm and rapid movement. Both began swatting frantically and stumbled toward the garage door. Within 2 minutes, visible swelling distorted their faces and necks. Mara collapsed first at the doorway, clutching her throat as her airways constricted. Elliot made it 3 steps further before dropping to his knees. Elliot received an estimated 40 stings within the first minute. Mara, at least 35. Numbers later confirmed during post-mortem examination. Neither could reach the phone inside, which had been left charging on a workbench. At 4:31 in the afternoon, a neighbor working in his yard heard unusual commotion and saw the massive bee swarm. He called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived at 4:47 in the afternoon, finding both unconscious and not breathing. Despite aggressive treatment, including epinephrine and advanced airway attempts, made difficult by severe facial and throat swelling, neither responded. The medical examiner determined both died from anaphylactic shock, causing complete airway closure and catastrophic blood pressure collapse. The autopsy showed severe swelling in the throat, fluid in the lungs, and high levels of a blood chemical that indicate death from a severe allergic reaction. The security footage was reviewed by county health investigators examining the incident, with digital copies preserved under evidence chain protocols. The apiary was dismantled by a licensed removal service within 72 hours following inspection by local agricultural and public health officials.
It was October 2nd, 2018, and evening had settled over a large state university campus in Pennsylvania. A residence hall on the north side housed primarily first-year students in shared rooms arranged along fluorescent-lit corridors. Cassius Thorne was 19 years old and in his first semester at the university, enrolled in a general studies program. He shared a small dorm room with another freshman, and the two had developed a casual friendship based on shared interests in gaming and online content. Both spent significant time watching video platforms featuring challenge-based videos. During this period, an older challenge format had experienced renewed attention. The challenge involved swallowing a tablespoon of ground cinnamon without any liquid. The substance's fine, dry texture made it nearly impossible to swallow in that quantity without coughing, and the resulting struggle was often presented as humorous. Most participants coughed violently and abandoned the attempt without serious injury. However, the challenge carried a serious but often overlooked risk. Forceful coughing could drive fine cinnamon particles deep into the lungs, where they could not be easily cleared, triggering severe inflammation known as aspiration pneumonitis. While most cases caused only temporary irritation, rare hospitalizations and isolated deaths had been documented after large-scale inhalation. That evening, Cassius and his roommate had been watching compilation videos and discussed attempting one themselves, settling on the cinnamon challenge due to its apparent simplicity. The roommate agreed to film. They returned to their dorm room, and Cassius retrieved a tablespoon and ground cinnamon from the floor's shared kitchen. He sat on his desk chair, facing the camera, filled the spoon with a heaping amount of cinnamon, and confirmed that the recording had started. Cassius placed the entire spoonful into his mouth at once. The immediate effect was an inability to swallow, as the powder absorbed moisture and formed a thick, dry mass. Within seconds, he began coughing violently. The reflexive coughing expelled a cloud of cinnamon powder from his mouth and nose, but the sharp inhalations between coughs drew fine particles deep into his airways and lungs. The coughing continued for more than a minute. His face reddened, and his eyes watered as he struggled to clear his airway. His roommate stopped recording and offered him water, which Cassius drank between coughs. The coughing gradually subsided, though he continued clearing his throat and complained of chest irritation. Both treated the attempt as a failed stunt. Over the next 12 hours, Cassius developed progressively worsening symptoms. He went to bed, but woke repeatedly coughing and feeling short of breath. By morning, he had developed a fever and was breathing rapidly with visible effort. His roommate suggested visiting the campus health center, but Cassius initially declined. By afternoon, his condition had deteriorated further. He was coughing up discolored sputum, his fever had increased, and he became severely winded with minimal movement. His roommate contacted their resident advisor, who called emergency services. Paramedics arrived and found Cassius in severe respiratory distress with low oxygen levels. He was transported to a regional medical center, where imaging revealed widespread lung inflammation linked to inhaled cinnamon particles. He was admitted to intensive care, but his condition continued to worsen. Over the following days, his lungs failed to adequately exchange oxygen, progressing into acute respiratory distress syndrome. He was placed on mechanical ventilation, but complications from severe airway injury and infection led to multi-organ failure. He died several days after attempting the cinnamon challenge. Investigators later reviewed the phone recording to confirm the sequence of events, and the medical examiner ruled the death accidental. The university issued safety advisories through residence halls, warning students about similar online stunts. It was July 4th, 2017, in the arid desert wash outside Tucson, Arizona. The late afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across scattered creosote bushes and dry grass that dotted the remote landscape. 27-year-old Prentice Glome, a social media entertainer who specialized in extreme celebration stunts, had chosen this isolated location to avoid permits and safety regulations that would limit his ambitious 4th of July performance. Prentice had built a reputation for pushing boundaries with homemade pyrotechnic displays, often modifying consumer fireworks to create more dramatic visual effects for his online audience. His followers knew him as someone who dismissed protective gear, believing it compromised the authenticity of his content. For this live stream, he had spent hours constructing an elaborate belt by bundling multiple Roman candles and bottle rockets together with nylon webbing, combining their fuse lines into a single ignition point for maximum simultaneous discharge. To enhance the visual spectacle, Prentice wore a synthetic athletic jersey made of a polyester and spandex blend, chosen because its metallic sheen would catch and reflect the fireworks light. He positioned his tripod camera 6 feet away and activated a secondary chest-mounted recording device before preparing for what he expected would be his most impressive stunt yet. The surrounding area featured dry brush and grass under 8 inches tall, providing what he considered the perfect desert backdrop. The temperature had reached 94 degrees that afternoon, and humidity levels remained exceptionally low at just 8%, creating ideal conditions for rapid fire spread. When Prentice ignited the combined fuse with a handheld torch, the fire traveled much faster than anticipated due to tight bundling of the explosive materials. Multiple Roman candles and rockets ignited nearly simultaneously, creating an intense flash of flame and directional discharge that sent superheated sparks directly onto his synthetic jersey and waistband. The extreme heat immediately began melting the polyester fabric, which liquefied and adhered to his skin. The nylon belt failed catastrophically under thermal stress as molten plastic dripped onto his abdomen. His clothing ignited as flames engulfed his torso and neck area. Prentice dropped to the ground, attempting to smother the fire by rolling, but the melting synthetic fabric continued burning and sticking to his flesh. The intense heat and flames entered his airway as he gasped, causing immediate respiratory distress from superheated gases. Falling sparks from the disintegrating fireworks landed in nearby brush, which caught fire almost instantly in the bone-dry conditions. The tripod camera continued recording briefly before smoke obscured the view completely. Viewers watching the live stream immediately contacted emergency services, providing the GPS coordinates Prentice had shared in previous videos filmed at this same desert location. Paramedics arrived 23 minutes after the first emergency call to find both Prentice and a brush fire covering approximately 1 to 2 acres. Despite immediate medical attention, Prentice was pronounced deceased at the scene. The county medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as thermal injury with airway compromise sustained during the fireworks accident. The fire department contained the brush fire using foam suppressants and documented improper fireworks discharge in undeveloped land in their official report. Authorities ruled the death accidental and no criminal charges were filed. The case was closed following standard fire investigation protocols concluding that Prentice Glome had died as a result of his own modified pyrotechnic device malfunctioning during an unsupervised live stream performance.
It was April 8th, 2018, in a modern commercial district of downtown Seattle. A mild spring morning had settled over the area, with sunlight reflecting off rows of newly constructed office buildings. Inside a mid-rise professional complex, activity moved at a measured pace as employees attended meetings and visitors were escorted through reception areas. Zach Monoma, 29, worked as a senior associate at a consulting firm that specialized in regulatory compliance and corporate risk assessment. He was known for his clear communication style and confidence when presenting complex ideas to clients and trainees. As part of his role, Zach frequently participated in orientation sessions for visiting interns and university students, offering practical examples meant to illustrate abstract concepts like liability, safety standards, and professional responsibility. On the morning of April 8th, a small group of students had been invited to observe a training seminar at the firm's offices. The session was held in a large conference room on an upper floor, featuring expansive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the surrounding streets and neighboring buildings. The windows were set into slim metal frames and designed to maximize natural light, a selling point emphasized when the building was constructed several years earlier. Zach had prepared remarks that focused on risk evaluation and assumptions people make about safety in professional environments. As the discussion progressed, attention turned briefly to building design and modern materials. Zach referenced the strength of contemporary architectural glass, explaining that it was engineered to withstand significant force without shattering. Wanting to make the concept more tangible, Zach moved toward one of the windows. He explained that the glass panels were impact-resistant and commonly used in high-rise construction. The students watched as he placed his hands against the glass and leaned forward slightly, applying modest pressure. The panel did not flex or crack, reinforcing his point. Several of the students later said they assumed the demonstration was safe because of how confidently he explained the material. Encouraged by the response, Zach increased the pressure, shifting more of his body weight forward to demonstrate what he believed was a wide margin of safety. The glass remained intact. However, the frame securing the panel to the surrounding structure was not designed to support sustained lateral force from a concentrated load. Without warning, the fasteners anchoring the frame gave way. The glass itself did not break, but the entire window assembly detached from its mounting. Zach, already leaning into the panel, was unable to recover his balance as the frame moved outward. He fell with the window through the opening. The fall ended several stories below on a paved service area adjacent to the building. Emergency services were called immediately, and responders arrived within minutes. Zach was pronounced deceased at the scene. The students were escorted from the building by staff, many of them visibly shaken by how quickly the incident had unfolded. A subsequent investigation by building inspectors and safety officials focused on the window assembly and its mounting system. The report concluded that the glass met all impact resistance standards, but the frame was designed to withstand wind pressure, not direct human force. No structural defects or maintenance failures were found. The coroner ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma from a fall, with toxicology negative and no evidence of reckless intent. In response, the firm revised its safety policies, banning physical demonstrations involving architectural features and installing warning signage near large windows. The company later partnered with a local university to fund safety awareness workshops, emphasizing how assumptions about safety can lead to unintended consequences. It was July 8, 2018, the sandstone expanse near Canyonlands National Park. Evan Mudry and Ria Beth Lopez, minimalist lifestyle influencers from Portland, had driven 12 hours to this remote Utah location for a challenge that would turn fatal. Evan and Ria had built a modest following, documenting their extreme minimalism experiments, 30-day water fasts, sleeping outdoors in winter, living on $1 per day. Their social media platforms attracted roughly 3,500 followers who admired their discipline and ascetic philosophy. Their content focused on proving that modern humans had grown soft, that discomfort was the path to enlightenment. The challenge they had designed was deliberately brutal. 7 days alone in the Utah desert with 1 gallon of water per person per day, minimal food, and complete silence. The twist that made it monetizable was a penalty system. Speaking a single word would cost them $100 from their savings account, documented via a chest-mounted action. The news had issued excessive heat warnings for the region, with temperatures forecast to reach 106 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Evan dismissed these warnings in his final Instagram post, making light of the issue. They hiked into the backcountry at dawn with minimal gear. Evan further limited their already sparse water, believing mild dehydration would enhance clarity, and Rhea followed without question. By day 3, both showed severe dehydration, yet the footage shows them communicating only with gestures, keeping silent despite obvious distress. On day 4, approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, Evan attempted to descend a steep sandstone ledge they had climbed earlier. Dehydration had affected his coordination and judgment. His foot slipped on loose rock, and he fell 9 feet onto a boulder outcropping below. The body camera, intermittently recording due to heat-related shutdowns, captured the crack of impact and Evan's leg bending at an unnatural angle, a compound fracture of the upper thigh consistent with a femur break, with bone protruding through skin. He let out an involuntary scream before biting down on his shirt, attempting to suppress any further sound, writhing silently while blood pooled on the hot rock. Rhea reached him within minutes. The footage shows her examining the wound, hands shaking, mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. She fashioned a splint from their tent poles and began dragging Evan by his arms toward their vehicle. Still 7 miles distant, the temperature peaked at 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Over the next 48 hours, she made less than 2 miles, stopping frequently to rest in whatever shade she could find. The camera shows her collapsing on day 6, convulsing briefly, then lying still. Evan, immobilized and suffering massive blood loss from what was suspected to be a femoral artery injury, survived approximately another 36 hours before succumbing. A missing persons report, filed by Rhea's sister on day 9, prompted a search. Park rangers located their vehicle on day 11 and found both bodies the following afternoon. The body camera's memory card was recovered intact, containing segmented files with significant gaps, with roughly half of the footage usable and the remainder corrupted by heat and dust exposure. The medical examiner determined Rhea died from hyperthermia and multiple organ failure caused by extreme dehydration and physical exertion. The county coroner noted that speaking immediately after the accident would likely have saved both lives, as they were within intermittent cell signal range near the ridgeline and access trail for the first 18 hours after Evan's fall. Funerals were small and private, with Evan's in Oregon and Rhea's in Texas, attended only by family and a few close friends, with no mention of their online lives. The recovered body camera footage was returned to Evan's parents and immediately destroyed, and all their social media accounts were deleted. Within weeks, all traces of the challenge disappeared from the internet, leaving only official case records. It was October 14th, 2018, when a quiet evening in a modest home in southern Indiana ended in a fatal kitchen accident. Outside, autumn temperatures had begun to drop, but inside the single-story house, dinner preparations were underway beneath warm overhead lighting. The kitchen contained aging appliances that had been in regular use for years, including an older model stovetop pressure cooker stored beneath the counter. Marla Kinsey was 44 and worked in local delivery services, spending long days driving neighborhood routes and meeting strict deadlines. According to co-workers and family members, she was known for an assertive personality and a strong belief that experience outweighed written instructions. Investigators later noted that she had a documented history of dismissing manufacturer safety guidelines and treating warning labels as unnecessary precautions. That evening, she prepared to use the pressure cooker to finish a meal. Her husband had earlier noticed hardened food residue accumulating around the appliance's pressure release valve and suggested that it be cleaned before the next use. Records later showed that the instruction manual, which outlined regular valve maintenance and lid locking procedures, had never been opened since the appliance was purchased 2 years earlier. According to investigators, Marla refused assistance and attempted to secure the lid herself after it failed to seat normally against the rim. Instead of stopping to inspect the obstruction, she applied additional force until the locking mechanism engaged. Multiple warning labels on the cooker indicated that improper sealing and blocked venting systems could cause dangerous pressure buildup, but those warnings were ignored. She then activated the burner and increased the heat to maximum. Within minutes, internal temperature began climbing rapidly inside the sealed chamber. Later, examination showed that hardened residue had obstructed both the primary and secondary pressure release systems, preventing normal venting. With no functional escape path, pressure rose far beyond the cooker's design limits. The aluminum vessel expanded as internal force increased. Stress fractures formed around the lid locking assembly, which had already been weakened by improper seating. As the cooker continued heating, the locking ring began to deform under the mounting load. Investigators determined that Marla had leaned directly over the cooker, attempting to inspect the lid as pressure continued to rise. Moments later, the locking mechanism failed completely. The lid separated from the vessel and launched upward with explosive force, propelled by compressed steam and boiling contents. The metal lid struck her face and skull at close range, delivering massive blunt force trauma. She collapsed beside the stovetop as superheated steam vented violently into the kitchen. Family members immediately contacted emergency services. Paramedics arrived to find extensive head injuries incompatible with survival. Marla was pronounced dead at the scene. A subsequent investigation found no mechanical defect in the appliance itself. The coroner ruled the cause of death as catastrophic blunt force head trauma resulting from a pressure cooker lid becoming a high-velocity projectile. Inspectors documented multiple safety violations, including a clogged vent system, forced closure of the lid, and operation at excessive heat levels despite clear warning labels. The final report concluded that the accident was entirely preventable. Proper cleaning of the pressure release valve, adherence to manufacturer instructions, and use of standard operating procedures would have prevented pressure from reaching lethal levels. The incident was classified as a fatal user error explosion caused by willful disregard of basic appliance safety protocols.
It was April 28th, 2020, late on a Thursday afternoon in a suburban neighborhood outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The street was lined with single-family homes and most residents were still at work. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant sounds of traffic. Sutton Amara was 22 years old and in her senior year at a nearby university where she had been involved in campus theater productions since freshman year and was finishing up her communications degree. She was living at home with her parents and younger brother to save on expenses while commuting to campus. Friends later described her as curious and prone to following online trends, particularly content popular among her peer group. During the early months of the pandemic, a dangerous online trend emerged as more young adults spent time on social media during campus shutdowns. The challenge involved consuming large amounts of diphenhydramine, a common over-the-counter allergy medication that can cause hallucinations, seizures, cardiac arrhythmias, and death at high doses. Participants filmed themselves taking far beyond the recommended amount to document the altered effects, despite warnings from medical professionals that had not reached all viewers. That afternoon, Sutton was home alone while both parents were still at work and not expected to return for approximately 2 hours. She had been watching videos related to the challenge over the previous week and decided to attempt it herself. She had purchased a bottle of the medication at a pharmacy several days earlier without difficulty. She went to her room, set up her phone to record, and removed 24 tablets from the bottle. Each tablet contained 50 milligrams of diphenhydramine. Standard dosing was 1 or 2 tablets every 4 to 6 hours. The amount she selected represented a dose exceeding 1,000 milligrams, a level associated with life-threatening toxicity. She swallowed the tablets over several minutes while the camera recorded. Initial effects began within the first hour. Diphenhydramine at toxic doses acts as a powerful anticholinergic, disrupting normal nervous system function. Sutton became increasingly disoriented, with blurred vision, dry mouth, and difficulty focusing. She remained alone in her room with the recording still running. Approximately 90 minutes after ingestion, her condition worsened rapidly. Her heart rate became markedly elevated as the drug interfered with normal cardiac conduction. Witnesses who later reviewed portions of the footage described her pacing unsteadily, appearing confused and distressed, though she did not attempt to call for help. Shortly thereafter, she suffered a generalized tonic-clonic seizure that lasted more than 2 minutes. She remained unconscious afterward, and a second seizure followed several minutes later. The toxic effects of the overdose caused severe electrical instability in both her brain and heart. Her father arrived home around 5:40 and went upstairs when she did not respond to his calls. He found her unresponsive on the floor with the phone still recording. He called emergency services while checking for breathing and pulse, both of which were weak and irregular. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Sutton in a life-threatening cardiac arrhythmia. They began resuscitation and transported her to a nearby emergency department under active CPR. Despite aggressive treatment, including medications and repeated defibrillation, she could not be revived and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrhythmia with seizure activity due to acute diphenhydramine toxicity, with toxicology confirming a severe overdose. Her family later issued a public warning, and several pharmacy chains reviewed and reinforced existing purchase guidelines. It was November 12, 2016, in a rented duplex in Columbus, Ohio. The autumn afternoon was overcast with temperatures around 42 degrees. Inside the modest home, 32-year-old Lesta Vant had transformed her spare bedroom into a maze of stacked cardboard boxes reaching 6 to 7 feet high throughout the cramped space. Lesta worked as a lifestyle content creator, filming daily unboxing videos and resale inventory hauls for her online following. Over 18 months, her hobby evolved into a full-time operation that consumed nearly every inch of the spare room. She never invested in proper shelving, instead allowing boxes of varying sizes and weights to accumulate in precarious, freestanding columns. The narrow pathways between these unstable towers measured less than 18 inches wide. Boxes contained everything from bulk reference books and small appliances to electronics and household goods, creating uneven weight distribution. Many lower cartons showed visible bowing along their seams, the corrugated layers permanently compressed from sustained pressure and long-term stacking stress. That evening, Lesta announced a special live stream she called her 24-hour sorting challenge, promising viewers she would organize the entire inventory collection in one marathon session. She positioned her camera at the doorway, angling the lens to capture the cluttered workspace. The lighting was dim, provided only by a single overhead fixture and recording lights. Several stacks leaned subtly toward one another, creating shared pressure points where columns relied on adjacent piles for lateral stability. The air felt heavy with dust and stale cardboard fibers, disturbed each time a box shifted slightly under load. When Lesta climbed onto a lower stack to reach upper boxes, she shifted her full weight onto a poorly balanced column. The bottom layer, already weakened by prolonged compression, shifted outward under the added force. Cardboard fibers that had gradually lost rigidity failed under dynamic load. The collapse triggered a rapid cascade as the vertical stack gave way. Adjacent towers, destabilized by the initial failure, fell in sequence across the narrow room. The domino effect converted isolated instability into full room collapse. Lesta became pinned against the wall and floor as an estimated 600 to 900 pounds of inventory settled across her torso. The concentrated weight restricted chest expansion, preventing adequate breathing and limiting any meaningful movement. The live stream camera continued recording from the doorway, though the angle provided limited visibility. Viewers assumed the feed had frozen. A neighbor heard the crash, but dismissed it as routine movement of stored items. Roughly 45 minutes later, concerned viewers requested a welfare check. Emergency responders began systematic removal of debris. Fire personnel noted the absence of shelving anchors, wall bracing, or weight planning. Investigators also documented that several stacks had been leaning for weeks, supported only by friction and neighboring columns rather than stable framework. By the time she was uncovered, the room's contents had compacted into a flattened mass, reflecting progressive instability rather than sudden anomaly. No single box was unusually heavy. Investigators determined the fatal condition resulted from cumulative load without structural reinforcement. Cardboard under sustained compression loses rigidity and lateral resistance. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as compressive asphyxia. The sustained weight across her chest and upper abdomen prevented normal respiratory expansion, restricting oxygen intake until hypoxia led to cardiac arrest. There were no catastrophic internal injuries, no single crushing blow. Instead, the prolonged mechanical restriction of her rib cage made effective breathing impossible. The room had exceeded its limits long before the final shift. What appeared manageable on camera had been structurally compromised for months, requiring only one redistribution of weight to turn storage into collapse.
It was November 11th, 2016. A small apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood hummed with the glow of multiple cameras and ring lights, all pointed at a custom-built treadmill desk setup. Marco and Tara Hensley were in their 30s, minor figures in the remote fitness coaching world, running an online wellness brand focused on productivity hacks for desk workers. By promoting walking desks, standing workstations, and biohacking techniques, they had built a modest following on Twitch. Their content emphasized extremes: 48-hour fasts, cold plunges, dopamine detox challenges. The 96-hour walk and work challenge aimed to test endurance while promoting their products. A treadmill desk allows low but constant speed movement while working, safe for moderate daily use. Continuous use without sleep, however, causes muscle breakdown, dehydration, cognitive decline, and organ failure. They had planned the stream meticulously, setting up bathroom breaks on camera, prepared meals, and a rotation of micro-rest periods where they would stand still on the moving belt for 15-minute intervals. They relied on energy drinks and stimulant supplements to stay awake, and multiple viewers had commented warnings about rhabdomyolysis and sleep deprivation psychosis by hour 60. A registered nurse watching the stream filed a wellness check request with Seattle Police on November 10th, but officers arrived, spoke briefly with the couple through the door, documented concern, and left after confirming they were adults acting voluntarily. By hour 88, Tara's urine had turned dark brown, visible when she used a clear container on camera per their transparency protocol. She began slurring words and seemed disoriented, asking Marco repeatedly what day it was. Marco was experiencing visual hallucinations, swatting at objects that weren't there, and talking to his deceased father. Neither acknowledged the other's deterioration. Both locked into a state of delusional determination. At hour 91, Marco's gait became unstable, his legs no longer coordinating properly, as severe sleep deprivation and stimulant overload scrambled his motor control. At 3:47 in the afternoon on November 11th, Marco stumbled forward on the treadmill, his feet tangled, and he pitched face first toward the fixed wooden desk edge. His forehead struck the desk with audible force, and his body twisted as he fell, neck bending at an unnatural angle under axial compression, before he collapsed onto the belt, which dragged him backward off the platform. Tara screamed and tried to help him, but her legs gave out, and she fell beside him, unable to stand. The live stream continued broadcasting, both of them motionless on the floor, until the stream automatically paused during a brief encoder reset. Multiple viewers called 911. Fire department paramedics arrived 11 minutes later, breaking through the apartment door. Marco had no pulse and showed obvious neck trauma with neurological devastation. Tara was semi-conscious, severely dehydrated, hypotensive, and unresponsive to questions. Marco was pronounced dead at the scene. Tara was rushed to a nearby medical center in extremis, where she died the following day from acute kidney failure caused by rhabdomyolysis, a condition where broken-down muscle tissue releases proteins that poison the kidneys. The medical examiner determined Marco died from a C2 vertebral fracture, causing immediate spinal cord severance and traumatic brain injury from the desk impact. Tara's autopsy revealed her muscles had been breaking down for at least 48 hours before collapse, releasing fatal levels of myoglobin into her bloodstream. With severe dehydration and prolonged exertion listed as contributing factors, and noted elevated creatine kinase levels consistent with extreme, sustained muscular exertion. The entire 91-hour stream remained archived on the platform until the family requested removal 3 weeks later. Funerals were small and private, held in Seattle with only close family and a few friends attending. It was April 29, 2017, when heavy spring storms flooded rural Texas, sending muddy water 2 feet deep across a remote low-water crossing as dark clouds lingered overhead. Diane Vance, a 52-year-old logistics worker, sat behind the wheel of her sedan. Known for her stubborn streak and tendency to challenge authority, Diane had chosen this back road as a shortcut home from weekend errands. The main highway would have added 15 minutes to her journey, and her impatience had grown throughout the day. A sheriff's deputy had positioned his patrol car near the crossing, directing drivers to turn around. The officer had spent the afternoon warning motorists about the dangerous conditions. When Diane approached, the deputy stepped forward and gestured for her to stop. The officer explained that the crossing was impassable and pointed toward the detour signs. Several other vehicles had already turned around after receiving similar warnings. Diane appeared to acknowledge the warning, but remained in her vehicle. After the deputy walked back toward other approaching cars, Diane suddenly accelerated around the displaced barricade and entered the flowing water. Her decision defied both common sense and direct police instruction. The deputy immediately began radioing for additional units. The sedan immediately lost traction on the slick concrete surface. The lateral current caught the vehicle's undercarriage and began pushing it sideways across the roadway. Within seconds, the car had rotated 90 degrees and was sliding toward a deep drainage channel that paralleled the crossing. The vehicle's momentum carried it over the channel's edge. As it tumbled down the embankment, the sedan rolled completely over, landing roof down in the rushing water. The impact shattered most of the windows. Water flooded the inverted passenger compartment rapidly through the broken glass. Emergency lights from the deputy's patrol car reflected off the churning surface. The current continued pushing the overturned vehicle downstream. The car came to rest against a concrete culvert approximately 50 yards from the crossing. Debris from upstream, tree branches, fence posts, and plastic containers accumulated against the wreckage, further pinning it in place. The rain intensified as emergency personnel began arriving at the scene. The deputy radioed for help and waded into the shallows, but the overturned sedan had been swept beyond reach. Swift water teams arrived 20 minutes later and found the car lodged against the drainage structure. Divers worked in near-zero visibility, feeling their way through the submerged wreckage. The water temperature had dropped with the storm, and the current made every movement difficult. They removed Diane from the flooded driver's seat. She was unresponsive and could not be revived despite immediate resuscitation attempts on the muddy bank. The county coroner later determined that Diane had died from drowning. The official incident report documented that the crossing had been properly marked as hazardous and that multiple warnings had been issued to drivers. Investigators found no mechanical defects with the vehicle and concluded that the death resulted from an unauthorized attempt to cross floodwaters despite clear warnings from law enforcement. Witnesses reported that Diane had seemed agitated before ignoring the deputy's instructions. The incident served as another reminder of flash flood dangers during severe weather events. It was August 12, 2017, in a quiet suburban backyard on the outskirts of a Midwestern city. Folding chairs were set along the grass, and nearly 30 people stood gathered behind a loose line of tripods and smartphones, all aimed toward a wooden table in the center of the yard. On the table rested several hardcover books, stacked beside a single thick volume chosen for the afternoon's experiment. Daniel Mercer, 35, was an online content creator who built a small following by testing viral claims and internet myths. His videos often mixed basic science with spectacle, and he had begun looking for stunts that would draw more attention. In the weeks before that afternoon, he announced he would attempt to prove that a thick hardcover book could stop a bullet. Friends later said Daniel seemed confident from the start. He told the crowd the book was heavy, the shot would be controlled, and everyone would stand well back. A close friend agreed to handle the firearm, while Daniel planned to hold the book against his chest and demonstrate its protective strength. Several people later admitted they felt uneasy, but no one objected. Because Daniel spoke calmly and acted certain, most assumed the idea must be safer than it sounded. Shortly after 5 p.m., the cameras began recording. Daniel stepped into position and lifted the book with both hands, pressing it flat against the center of his chest. He stood only a few feet from the muzzle, aligning the cover so it faced the barrel directly. The yard fell quiet as final adjustments were made. No protective barrier stood between him and the gun. Someone counted down. When the shot was fired, the bullet struck the middle of the book and tore through the pages instantly. Paper burst outward in a cloud of fragments as the binding split apart. The round passed through the back cover without slowing and entered Daniel's chest. The impact knocked him backward onto the grass. For a moment, no one moved. Then several people screamed as blood spread across his shirt. A few rushed forward while others stood frozen, staring at the torn book lying beside him. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. The cameras continued recording as confusion and panic spread through the yard. Daniel did not attempt to sit up or speak. Emergency calls were placed within seconds. When paramedics arrived, they found him unresponsive and showing no signs of breathing. Despite brief life-saving efforts, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later confirmed that a hardcover book offered no meaningful resistance against the type of round that had been fired. Ballistics testing showed the bullet passed through the pages with minimal loss of energy. The firearm functioned normally, and toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol involved. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death a gunshot wound to the chest and classified the incident as an accidental death caused by reckless judgment. Authorities reviewed the case, and the shooter faced charges related to negligent firearm use. The video was never released, and Daniel's channel disappeared from the internet within days. Friends later said he had wanted to prove a simple myth on camera. Instead, the experiment became a permanent reminder that some ideas are not just wrong, they are deadly.
It was August 19, 2015, on the top level of a 14-story parking structure in downtown Chicago, Illinois. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete surface as temperatures reached 82 degrees. Weather reports had recorded intermittent wind gusts throughout the day, with sustained speeds around 12 miles per hour and occasional bursts reaching 18 miles per hour. 22-year-old Rilla Spoke had gained a modest following as a fitness and parkour content creator, specializing in high-altitude balance demonstrations and urban climbing challenges. Her videos typically featured dramatic stunts performed on rooftops and elevated structures throughout the Chicago area. Rilla was known for refusing to use safety harnesses or protective equipment, believing that such precautions diminished the authenticity of her performances. That evening, Rilla had announced a special sunset live stream from what she described as one of the city's most scenic elevator elevated locations. She had chosen the parking structure for its unobstructed views of the downtown skyline and its accessibility without requiring permits. The top level featured a concrete perimeter wall approximately 3 feet high, topped with concrete ledge that measured roughly 8 inches in width. Rilla wore fitted athletic clothing and flat-sole sneakers that had become worn from previous climbing activities. She carried a handheld camera stabilizer, which added approximately 2 pounds of weight to one arm and required careful coordination to maintain both camera stability and personal balance. As the sun began to set, Rilla positioned herself on the narrow concrete ledge that ran along the building's perimeter. The ledge provided minimal surface area for foot placement, requiring precise weight distribution and constant micro-adjustments to compensate for external forces. A thin layer of dust and fine grit had accumulated on the ledge surface from vehicle exhaust and ambient urban particulate matter. Rilla began her routine by walking along the ledge while filming the skyline behind her. To achieve dramatic camera angles, she positioned her body partially over the edge of the building, with her heels resting on the narrow concrete surface and her torso extending outward over the 14-story drop. This positioning maximized the visual impact but significantly reduced her margin for error. During the filming sequence, a wind gust stronger than the prevailing conditions pushed against the extended camera stabilizer, creating unexpected rotational force on her arm and upper body. The sudden pressure shifted her weight distribution beyond the narrow balance point provided by the concrete ledge. Her worn sneakers lost traction on the dust-covered concrete surface as her heels slipped from the narrow support. Rilla fell approximately 140 feet from the top level of the parking structure to the concrete surface below. The impact occurred in a loading area adjacent to the building. Emergency medical services arrived within 6 minutes of receiving the initial call from witnesses who had observed the fall from street level. Paramedics immediately began resuscitation efforts, but the severity of the injuries made successful intervention impossible. Rilla was pronounced deceased at the scene. Authorities ruled the death accidental, citing multiple blunt force injuries from a high-altitude fall. The police report highlighted hazardous wind conditions and missing safety gear as contributing factors to the fatal incident during a risky activity. The parking structure was temporarily closed for investigation but reopened the following day. No criminal charges were filed and the case was officially closed. It was July 19, 2019, and night had fallen across a stretch of interstate highway outside Nashville, Tennessee. The 4-lane roadway carried moderate traffic in both directions, with vehicles traveling between 65 and 75 miles per hour. Streetlights illuminated the pavement at regular intervals. Jovi Sinclair was 26 years old and worked as a stylist at a salon in a suburban shopping district, maintaining a steady base of clients. She was active on social media, posting content related to hairstyling, fashion, and lifestyle topics with several thousand followers. Co-workers later described her as increasingly focused on engagement metrics and follower growth. At the time, a challenge format had gained popularity involving participants filming themselves dancing to a specific song in unexpected or dangerous locations. The videos typically showed the participants standing still at first, then suddenly dancing as the music began. While many were filmed in public spaces, a subset featured participants dancing in or near active roadways, often at night, with traffic risk treated as part of the appeal. That evening, Jovi had been driving with a friend who agreed to help film content. They were returning from dinner and traveling on the interstate when Jovi suggested attempting the challenge. Her friend later reported discouraging the idea due to safety concerns, but Jovi insisted the setting would make the video more dramatic. Jovi directed her friend to pull onto the shoulder about 2 miles from the nearest exit. The shoulder was narrow and separated from the right travel lane by a white stripe. Traffic remained steady. Visibility was adequate under streetlights, but the speed difference between stopped vehicles and passing traffic exceeded 70 miles per hour. Her friend stopped with hazard lights activated and began recording from the driver's window. After briefly pausing and glancing toward traffic, Jovi exited the car and stepped into the right travel lane, positioning herself roughly 15 feet from the vehicle. She was wearing dark clothing that offered little contrast against the pavement. Her plan was to remain still until the music started, then perform a short dance lasting about 15 seconds. As the recording began, Jovi stood motionless while vehicles approached from behind. Several drivers moved into the left lane to avoid her, and at least 2 honked as they passed. Jovi then began dancing, focused on the camera rather than oncoming traffic. Investigators later estimated that a sedan in the right lane was approximately 200 feet behind her when the driver first perceived her. The driver stated she appeared suddenly in his headlights, and at highway speed there was no time to brake or change lanes safely. The vehicle struck Jovi at an estimated 70 miles per hour. The driver braked immediately and stopped about 150 feet beyond the impact point. Jovi's friend called emergency services as other vehicles stopped and witnesses approached. Paramedics and State Highway Patrol arrived within 8 minutes. Jovi was found with injuries incompatible with survival and was pronounced dead at the scene. The driver was not injured and was not charged after investigators determined he bore no fault, while Jovi's friend was cited for stopping on the interstate without emergency justification. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be massive blunt force trauma. The video was restricted from public release during the investigation, and Highway Patrol later issued warnings addressing the challenge.
It was November 6, 2017, at a busy rail crossing in Newark, New Jersey, where residential streets met active freight tracks and weekday commuters gathered during the height of the morning rush. 29-year-old Sloan Mercer worked in retail management, supervising staff at a downtown clothing store. Known for her impatience and confrontational approach to obstacles, she was running late for her opening shift that Tuesday morning. She hurried along crowded sidewalks toward the crossing, aware that arriving late meant delaying store operations and explaining herself to supervisors who expected strict punctuality. The crossing arms had already descended across the roadway, red warning lights flashing in synchronized patterns. The familiar sound of train horns echoed through the urban landscape as the approaching locomotive announced its presence to anyone within hearing distance. Safety protocols were functioning exactly as designed, creating multiple layers of warning for pedestrians and vehicles. Other pedestrians gathered at the intersection, accepting the inevitable delay that comes with urban rail transportation. The crossing barriers created a clear physical boundary, supported by posted warning signs and active audio-visual alerts. Standard safety equipment had been recently inspected and certified by transportation authorities. Several witnesses later reported observing her pacing impatiently and muttering angrily while waiting behind the lowered barrier. Sloan observed the scene with growing frustration. Her confrontational nature emerged as she calculated the time being lost to her morning schedule. Rather than wait with the other pedestrians, she made the decision to circumvent the safety barriers and attempt to cross the active rail line before the approaching train reached the intersection. She stepped around the lowered crossing arm and began sprinting across the multiple sets of tracks. The distance appeared manageable, and her pace seemed adequate for clearing the rails before the locomotive arrived. However, halfway across the crossing, her foot caught in the flangeway gap between the rail and the pavement, a narrow groove that guides train wheels through the crossing. The unexpected obstacle caused her to stumble forward, losing her balance and falling directly into the path of the oncoming train. The locomotive struck her midsection with devastating force, the impact causing catastrophic blunt force injuries. The massive weight and momentum of the freight train made survival impossible from the moment of contact. The locomotive operator immediately applied emergency braking procedures, bringing the train to a stop approximately a quarter-mile down the track. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the impact, but Sloan was pronounced dead at the scene. The severity of the injuries left no possibility for medical intervention. Transportation authorities conducted a thorough investigation of the incident. Their official report confirmed that all safety systems had been functioning properly at the time of the collision. The crossing arms, warning lights, and audio signals had activated according to standard protocols. The locomotive operator had followed all required safety procedures, including the sounding of warning horns at appropriate distances from the crossing. Multiple pedestrian witnesses provided consistent accounts confirming the victim had deliberately bypassed the active safety barriers. Security camera footage from nearby businesses corroborated witness statements about the sequence of events. The final report documented that the victim had deliberately bypassed active safety barriers and entered the rail crossing against clearly posted warnings and visible safety equipment. It was May 2021, late in the afternoon, on a quiet suburban street on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. Long shadows stretched across neatly trimmed lawns as a white passenger van sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. 6 staff members climbed aboard for a short drive to a nearby park, expecting nothing more than an easy trip through the neighborhood. Tyrone Lanes, 42, had been a professional driver for more than 10 years. Known among co-workers for his calm demeanor, he took pride in following safety routines to the letter. That morning, he completed a full pre-trip inspection, checking tires, mirrors, seat positions, and fluid levels. Before starting the engine, he confirmed that every passenger was buckled in. Experience had taught him that small details prevented big problems. Moments later, the van eased away from the curb and rolled toward the first stop sign at the end of the block. As the vehicle turned onto the narrow street, Tyrone pressed the brake pedal to slow. Nothing happened. Confused, he tried again. The pedal sank lower than expected, offering almost no resistance. He pumped it twice, then shifted gears, but the slowing force never came. The van continued forward, gathering speed as a slight downhill curve appeared ahead. Panic set in. Parked cars lined both sides of the road, and the lane narrowed toward a bend. With only seconds to react, Tyrone made a sudden decision. He unbuckled his seatbelt, pulled the door open, and leapt from the moving van, hoping to escape before it struck something. His body hit the pavement hard. Witnesses later said he tumbled once before coming to rest near the curb. Later, medical examination would determine that the impact caused severe blunt force trauma to his head, leading to rapid loss of consciousness and death. Inside the van, chaos erupted. With the driver gone, the vehicle rolled forward without control. A middle-aged employee seated near the front lunged toward the steering wheel and managed to grab it. Passengers attempted to give instructions as everyone scrambled to respond. The van swerved around a parked car, clipped a mailbox, and drifted toward the curb. Using steady hands, the employee guided the van into a wide driveway and finally brought it to a stop. The passengers sat in stunned silence. No one inside the vehicle had been physically injured, though several were shaking uncontrollably. A call was placed to 911 within moments. Emergency responders arrived to find Tyrone unresponsive on the pavement. He was pronounced dead at the scene, while paramedics evaluated the passengers for minor injuries and severe shock. A formal investigation later found that the van's braking system had failed after a sudden hydraulic rupture caused a rapid loss of pressure. While the mechanical failure created the emergency, officials noted that remaining inside the vehicle would likely have allowed safer control using steering and remaining braking systems. The coroner ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma from striking the pavement. Toxicology tests were negative, and the death was classified as accidental. In the weeks that followed, the program revised its transportation policies, adding redundant brake inspections, emergency response training, and stricter trip planning procedures. A memorial fund was established in Tyrone's name to support advanced driver safety courses. Colleagues later said the tragedy was a painful reminder of how panic, even in experienced hands, can turn a survivable emergency into a fatal mistake. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.